I just hit the button. Okay. I just hit the button. I just hit the button. Oops. So can you check now?
I can see it live on YouTube.
You can see it. All right. I think it's live.
Yep. Yeah, it's on now. I can see it now.
Okay. Okay. We're live. Let's get started. So good evening, dear USA Cricket members. Welcome to the town hall for the USA Cricket constitutional amendments. As we presented during our 2023 AGM, the USA Cricket Board has initiated a process to revise and amend the USA Cricket Constitution, which was actually started a couple of years ago, but was then kept on hold for various reasons. And then we picked up from where we left off a couple of years ago, and started making changes. So we have a CRWG working group established in September of 2023. And the group contains experienced and diversified members. So I just want to take a minute to introduce the members before we start. We have Atul Rai, Nadia Gruni is the player director, and she is the chair of the CRWG working group. And Atul Rai is the member of the board. And Brian Walters is a long-time volunteer of USA Cricket and currently member of USA Cricket Development Committee. And Nisar Patel, current USA national player and current NGC member. And Rahul Kona, an independent volunteer, part of the CRWG group. So they have taken up a humongous task and taken up the feedback from the community, from the stakeholders, from the board, and made several changes. We believe these changes are essential and also at the right time, because as you know, the cricket is included into the LA Olympics, and part of that we have a process to we have to follow an application process with USOPC in order to become a NGB, which actually just started last week, where we got to attend USOPC workshop to initiate the process, where we were where we were educated on the several steps towards the application process, which includes becoming compliant with the USOPC guidelines. That's the most important. And then there are various other steps. So since there are a lot of compliances that we need to meet in order to apply for the USOPC membership, and also there were so many learnings and gaps, gray areas identified in the last few years of USA Cricket administration. So the CRWG have reviewed all the recommendations and all the best possible changes, and the USOPC, some of the USOPC guidelines, and they have made the recommendations. And a couple of weeks ago, on January 13th, USA Cricket Board has reviewed and approved the amendments. And then part of the, as per the USA Cricket Constitution, some of the articles, some of the sections of the Constitution must be approved by the members. So we want to present the changes that were approved by the board and also the changes that are required to be ratified by the membership, present to you. So the members are educated on the what are the changes being proposed and what is their role in terms of, choosing to whether to approve or disapprove the proposed amendments. So we want to thoroughly present these changes and explain you any questions or concerns. So these can be, accepted by the membership. That's the goal for us today. And part of this process, we have scheduled 2 town halls. One is today, and there is another one on Thursday. But we'll give you more details on the next town hall towards the end of the call. But without further taking any more time, so I want to start the presentation. I'm going to just walk through the few of the timelines. Before that, I want to introduce few of the board members and our US Cricket CEO who joined the call. Dr. Noor Murad is our new CEO who's on the call, and Srini Salwar, who's also a player director on the board. Okay, so the agenda for today, just walk you through the timelines and also the key amendments approved by the board and the key proposed amendments required to be approved by the USA Cricket membership. And then we talk about the next steps. So as I mentioned, the current CRWG is established in September 2020, 2021 originally. But they have made several recommendations, but those were approved by the board, but never were not presented to the membership. And then we had to complete several elections in the last 2 years to be fully compliant on our election process. So, and since now we are caught up on the elections, and we thought this is the right time to start the process again and to look into the constitution changes. And in 2023 September, the current CRWG is established, and they have provided the several versions of changes and reviewed with the board, and some of the changes were presented to the membership in the November AGM. And we also reached out to membership for feedback after the AGM in December. And we received some good feedback from the members, and CRWG then reconsidered some of the recommendations made by the membership and the stakeholders, and then they presented the final changes to board in January 2024. So, and these changes were thoroughly reviewed by the legal experts. So these were presented to our attorney, and then reviewed and recommended some few changes as required by the law to some, to make add the legal language around the changes. And then finally presented to the board, and board approved these changes on January 13th. So now we want to take this to membership for the final ratification, and then so the constitution is fully approved and effective. So the voting starts tomorrow, and it runs through February 5th for 8 days. So after the voting period, we'll know the results of the member voting, and then we'll present to the members the results. Okay, the USOPC NGB certification timeline. As mentioned, we require to become certified by USOPC to become a full member. This is essential for our participation into the Olympics. And it's also give us a lot of advantage and availability, the resources, USOPC resources, funding, and facilities, so many. So part of that, but the USOPC has an extensive process in terms of before they certify any sports organization as an NGB. That's why we were invited to a workshop in Colorado Springs last week. So the timeline starts, in the next 3 quarters from Q1 to Q3 of 2024. So we were going to work on becoming fully compliant on the USOPC guidelines. So the advantage for us is we already incorporated some of the required changes into the current revisions. So which actually can help us to speed up the compliance process. And USOPC will open application window in the 4th quarter of 2024. And then in 2025, during the 1st quarter and 2nd quarter, USOPC will receive the applications and they will review and they will conduct a public hearing on the submitted applications. And the Q2, they will conduct any audit if required, part of the application process. And then they will conduct a second public hearing as needed. And then Q3, Q4, 2025, the validation period and USOPC board's review of the application and the decision will be taken by end of the 2025. And then for 1st quarter of 2026, USOPC will announce the official status and grant the NGB status to the sports organizations. So there are total 4 sports along with cricket being included into LI 28 Olympics, and all 4 organizations will be following the same process. So it's an extensive process, but it's also help us to be fully compliant as a governing body and help us to work with USOPC. And the next, I would request Rahul Kona from the CIWG. He will walk us through some of the articles that are approved by the USA Cricket Board. Rahul, if you would,
Yes.
please.
Yeah, thank you, Venu. First of all, I would like to thank the CRWG, the USA Cricket Board, and all its members for actually turning around this thing very quickly. As Venu alluded, we were formed in September 23, and from September of 23 to actually getting into the final draft, after multiple legal rounds of approvals and the back and forth of changes, it's a Herculean task. So just want to give a shout out to my committee members and all the members who helped us get through that. A vast majority of what we tried to achieve was trying to be fair, consistent, and standardizing these things. But a lot of these requirements also to be able to how do we get into the USOPC requirements are being met, so we can be part of the US Olympic Association or committees. So the Article 4, which talks about as we have seen cricket, objectives and recognition of national and setting up cricket as an NGB for us. Cricket's inclusion, if you look at it, it's a historic moment for all of us, opening up the sport to many, broader global audience. Hopefully we get more sponsorships and potentially inspiring the next generation of cricketers to take up the sport. These amendments or these requirements as an NGB is part of the current version of the Ted Stevens Act, which was adopted in 1998. And this is something that we've been following through, and that's being done. Next slide, please. The Article 11 and Article 12, there are 2 articles which talk about the Athletes Advisory Council and the Team USA Athletics Council. The USA Athletics Advisory Council, they offer a multiple plethora of benefits for our athletes, be it representation, if you include advocacy for athletes' rights and interests with the Olympic associations and movements, supporting services like training, guiding, and navigate various aspects of their sporting careers, including compensation and personal development, education, community development, and networking. So, these requirements are actually, we added these requirements, and after conversation with the legal counsel, we've put all the requirements that we have in terms of, how many members to be needed, what is the best practices that need to be involved in there, how many, gender, we are trying to avoid gender bias, and at least 80% of members need to be, within 8 to 10-year athletes. Now, I just want all of us to remember that we are an infant organization. We may or may not have some of those 10-year athletes portfolio. So those are all things that we will seek to work with the legal counsel, to work with them and to find ways around to actually work so that we as a team, as as an NGB, are compliant with all the requirements that are part of the Athletes Advisory Council and also the US Athletics Commission. Next slide, please. Similarly, it's the same thing, like, and then I think the last one is the records of USA Cricket. Now, these are again a very simple, sorry, one more slide previous, Venu. Yes, so, no, sorry, the records of USA, yeah. So the Article 17 talks about records of US cricket, again, to ensure transparency, fairness, and accuracy and completeness. We really need to post all the last 3 years boards meeting to the website, publish a list of members on an annual basis, so we can actually get to a point where we know who my active members are, who have the right to vote, and also put everything out in the open. So the one of the key fundamental aspects of this group is ensuring transparency, accountability, and consistency as we go through the processes. So these are some things, we're trying to meet and, adhere to that, so we get the compliance requirements done, and we're part of the US Olympics Committee. That's all I had from my end. I'll hand it over to Dr. Rai to take over the members section.
Thank you, Rahul. Thanks, Venu, and the members of the CRWG. Constitutional amendment was an ongoing process, as Venu mentioned earlier. And this is many of the members, as we know, had asked for such changes over a period of time to bring clarity, sometimes possibly remove any vagueness that the NGC had to deal with during elections or otherwise. So therefore, it was a welcome thing that we added on. As mentioned, the process started a couple of years ago, and then it was left off, and then we have taken up from where it was, where they left off. And so Nadia is the chair of the committee, and unfortunately she's not here today, but I will touch upon some of the key elements of that Article 6, which deals with the membership. Now, as many of you know, membership is one of the essential aspects of what the members look at. What are the things that affect them, to become a member of USA Cricket. So I'm going to just go through some of the key proposed amendments. We moved all the definitions of all member classes to its own section, added USOPC's 10-year, 10+ year, and actively engaged athletes clarification to individual definition. Now, as Venu had mentioned, that the USOPC requirements, and Rahul actually also alluded to it, is something that we need to do so because we have now become members of USOPC, and we are now, cricket is a part of Olympics in 2028. So it becomes an absolute requirement for us to now look at this differently, because the requirement of more athletes participation in the board matters is now a requirement of the USOPC. So anyway, minimum number of clubs to constitute a league increased from 4 to 8, which can include female clubs. Now, many of us know that previously it was loosely worded and it wasn't really clear in terms of the number of clubs. So now we made it absolutely clear, because the thing, cricket is growing. So we do know that there are more clubs and leagues that are now wanting to become members of USA Cricket. So we thought it was an opportune time for us to change it. Rename other organizations from associate organization, added non-profit, for-profits to this member class. For example, there are organizations that are playing for fee, player fees or other fees. So we wanted to make sure that those organizations also got an opportunity to become members. Strengthen eligibility criteria to determine legitimate leagues. Clarified that clubs must have at least 12 or more registered individual members of 18 years or older. So that was another area that the NGC always had to deal with. So I think now it's crystal clear. Remove discretion of USAC to accept, reject, withdraw membership. Now that was again key in terms of how we deal with the membership issues. Added language that requires individual members to comply with all doping requirements, rules of ICC, USOPC, WADA, and USADA. Now, the USOPC requirements, on the other hand, they added USOPC 10-year athletes, USOPC 10-year plus athletes, and actively engaged athletes. So these are all now coming into focus as we are more athlete-based organization, and because we are a cricket organization, and absolutely and all members are player members. So membership requirements open to individual and amateur sports organizations in cricket. Structure includes all applicable groups or individuals or organizations in cricket. And also other NGB responsibilities, fulfill all responsibilities as an NGB as set forth by the USOPC and Ted Stevens Olympic Amateur Sports Act. So next slide, please. Key proposed amendments expanded from 6 to 8 zones, which I think was something that was needed as we grew over years. And Western Conference as Central, Central West, Northwest, Southwest. Eastern Conference as Atlantic, East, Northeast, and South. Added a category of force majeure clause. Obviously, whenever there is a there are natural disasters that come our way, such as COVID-19 or whatever the case may be. Sometimes we cannot enforce these. The NGC gets into this dogma as to how do they enforce these things. So, and therefore, we actually had to clarify that. Anyway, there are no USOPC requirements on that, the 6.7 and 6.9. So essentially, we've gone into the zones. As you can see, the map, I think the conferences are 2 now, but 4 zones in East. So that's the proposed zones, by the way. So the new map will have 8 zones and 2 conferences. So it makes it easier as the teams participate in the national tournaments, and it makes it that much more better for the organization. So next slide, please. I think I have completed my section of the this proposed amendments, and I will move it on to, I think, Nisarg or Brian.
No, Brian, yes.
Brian, okay, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Good afternoon, everybody. I echo the sentiments of my 2 colleagues before in saying how important it was to be able to work on this project. The Constitution was not a perfect document. I think it's important to acknowledge that it is still not a perfect document, but this is our attempt to sort of move us in a direction where we have a functional document. And even though it certainly required a lot of different steps and a lot of different iterations, the legal folks had to have a look at it. But I think ultimately we've come to the table with some recommendations that, if accepted, all else being equal, we will be a more functional organization. So I just wanted to say that up front. And by the way, for my other colleagues on the call, feel free to jump in and either add to something that I say or enhance it in any way that you like. But as far as this, the board of directors, I think we spent a fair amount of time discussing, which is what this article is. It is important to strengthen the portions of the Constitution that discuss the eligibility requirements in order to project or to prevent conflicts of interest. And I'm not necessarily going to read every single one of these to you, but just sort of talk a little bit about the thinking behind the proposed amendments. You just heard Dr. Wright talk about the importance of increased athlete representation because of the goal of being fully compliant with USOPC. And so it becomes important to adjust the composition of the board to include 4 athlete representatives to go along with 3 independent directors, 1 league director, 1 club director, and 3 individual directors. And, we spent a fair amount of time discussing the role of the NGC and particularly as it relates to understanding the requirements and the potential conflicts of interest for any potential board candidates. We felt that that's an important enough role that it needs to belong to the Ethics and Grievance Committee. And I think that accomplishes two things. The Ethics and Grievance Committee, I think specifically, has the responsibility of dealing with any and all actions or potential situations that would come to their purview. And then number two, it releases the NGC to have a more clearly defined role. The NGC previously had been playing sort of a dual role, and I think that might have led to some confusion about this role. Plus, you know, there are a lot of different things that went into that discussion, but I think that this arrangement makes a little bit more sense. And then consistent with the USOPC requirements of assuring appropriate athlete representation, as I mentioned, independent affiliate representation and appropriate board governance. That was the thinking behind that section. So next slide, please. And once again, I'm not necessarily going to read every single one of these things to you. Hopefully you can see the screen okay. But again, with the number of different people who have been running for elections, we wanted to make sure that we standardized that process. So first of all, it was important to achieve an optimal number of people who are running for the individual league and club director positions. And certainly it would require that each person who's running, each candidate potentially who's running for those league, those positions, to have 2 letters of recommendation submitted from USA Cricket members. We also felt that it was important to establish a standard voter eligibility cutoff time. So essentially that time is June 30th. June 30th of the year in which an election is supposed to happen is the cutoff time by which someone can put forward their status as candidates. And importantly, we thought it was significant that we highlighted the fact that individual club and league director candidates have to be registered members in good standing for 2 out of the previous or the preceding 3 years, to include the immediate 12-month period prior to the election. So that, I think, does a couple of things. Most importantly for me, it establishes consistency and it establishes a commitment to the organization before you're able to run for a leadership position in the organization. And again, consistent with USOPC requirements, we thought that it was important to have a designation for an affiliate organization director. And then the last slide, or the next slide, which is my last slide. This, to me, is very important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that, you know, for example, for those of us like Dr. Ryan and myself who've been around for a while and have seen over time the amount of, I would refer to it as a jaded attitude toward the management of cricket in this country, simply because we have not always done what we've needed to do appropriately. And much of that has sort of manifested itself in delayed elections and all of the different dominoes that fall from a delayed election. So this slide is intended to address some of those deficiencies. So the most important thing for me is that there is now a requirement for USA Cricket officers to resign from office if elections are not held in the time that they need to be. So in other words, we've had a couple of delayed elections in the last few years. Our commitment, at least not our commitment, our recommendation as members of this committee to the board is that show commitment to the proper governance and the proper management of the election function, such that if you are not, if for whatever reason an election does not happen, then effectively at the end of that year, the end of that period of time, those board members have to resign, because again, it shows fidelity to the process, and it also shows a commitment to make elections happen on time. And then we had a little bit of cleanup work to do for the elections that did not happen on time. there was some work done to sort of lay out how the staggering of the tenure of the board members that was distorted in the last few years because the elections were delayed, that was needed to have taken place. And it is extremely important to note that board members cannot serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. If it's a 3-year term, they can't serve more than 6 years. If it's a 4-year term, they can't serve more than 8 years. It doesn't mean that they can no longer serve on the board. It does mean that they have to come off of the board. In other words, they have to stand down from that position for at least 1 term. And then if they so desire, they can put their hand up to run for that position again later on, after the next session takes place. But the indefinite staying on the board for a long time, for an indefinite period of time, we thought that was the best way of being able to contribute toward that jaded attitude that I referred to earlier. And so we thought that it was important to fix that. There has been an expanded effort to state the conditions for removal of directors who are in breach of code of ethics. Once again, given the sport that we represent, we like to think of it as being above all other sports in terms of ethics and in terms of conduct. And I think that should also extend to the board. And so definitely it would be under the purview of the Ethics and Grievance Committee to be able to address issues relating to directors who are in breach of code of ethics, and then explicitly state what the process would be for their removal. And then finally, for me, there is a bit of a misconception, and I heard this a lot when I was on the board, that we were paid. It's explicit that directors cannot be compensated for their services on the board. And there might be every once in a while a situation that occurs where a director has to spend money on behalf of the organization. I think that would be appropriate for them to be reimbursed for those expenditures, but it is explicit that directors will not be compensated for the position of being on the board. So that's the thinking behind the adjusted statements that we just made about the composition of the board and what our goal was. And so, having said all of that, I think my time is up, so I'm going to hand things off to Nisar to continue.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, the board members and rest of the committee members. So in the interest of time, I'll move on. In terms of Article 8, which relates to officers, some of the key proposed amendments are we've added the executive secretary officer role, which pretty much relates the scope of recording minutes, be responsible of managing the corporate records, provide any notices to members, and manage any logistical aspects of the meetings. In terms of USOPC requirements, things like board governance, board meeting minutes, the board must post meeting minutes for the past 3 years on their websites. And then also submit any annual reports to USOPC with information that describes how the organization maintains their compliance. Next slide, please. Continuing on to Article 9, which relates to the committees. Some of the key proposed amendments here when it comes to committees are the terms have been reduced to 2 years, except the leagues committee, which will be for 1 year. Restructured the cricket committee to focus more on under 19s to seniors. There have been 2 added standing committees, which are Development Committee and Women's Cricket Committee, which aligns with the strategic focuses areas on women's cricket and then developing cricket into United States. Require each committee, as other members have mentioned, this is one of the USOPC's requirement. Each committee will now need to have at least 33.3% athlete representation, which will be appointed by the Athletes Advisory Council, which will be formed in the coming months. We've added the board can remove any committee member except athlete representatives who can only be removed by the USAC Athlete Advisory Council. And then reduce the ethics committee to 5 members. I think previously was 9 or 10. And then also removed USOPC's appointee to the NGC. And also, as Brian mentioned earlier, we've tightened the conflict of interest criteria. In terms of USOPC requirements, as mentioned earlier, we need 33.3% representation, USOPC 10-year and 10-year plus athletes on some of the designated committees. The Athlete Advisory Council, this will be formed with 100% athletes. It will be 6 to 12 members, and then at least 80% are NGB 10-year athletes. And then the remainder can be either 10-year or 10-year plus. In terms of board governance, the election, selection, and removal procedures for the committee members have also been added. Next slide, please. Article 9, continuing. Also, we've reduced the league's committee composition from 15 to 12 members, and then reduced the composition of audit committee from 8 to 5 members, and added some qualifications there. I think the USOPC is repeating again, so we can move on to the next slide. Then I think this is the last slide in terms of Article 20, which is related to amendment of Constitution. This just shows some of the key proposed amendments which are related to the numbering. So we updated the article numbers in Article 20.2 to make sure that the article continues to reference the correct article. And then this is based on the new articles that have been added to the Constitution, which changed the Article 18. And then the amendment of Constitution to Article 20. No requirements here from USOPC. Next slide, please. So I think with this being said, these are some of the proposed changes that, as you see, all of the committee members have put in front of you. So with that being said, I think I'll pass it on to Venubai again for the next steps.
Thank you, Nisar. Thank you very much, Nisar. Thank you all the
Thanks.
CRWG members for your inputs. Yeah, so the changes were made in, keeping in mind that we bring, better administration, better governance, more accountability and transparency to the administration of the organization. And also, it also, provides more athlete representation as required by USOPC. So I think we have proactively taken the initiation to include the USOPC guidelines ahead of the application process that actually can help us, in fast tracking our application in terms of preparedness, right? In terms of preparedness, we can be, ready by the time USOPC opens the application process. We can be fully compliant and, prepare our application accordingly. So as Brian mentioned during the presentation, so this Constitution, even after several proposed changes, may still not be perfect, but we will continue to work towards, revising the Constitution based on the learnings, based on the feedback year over year. We will make it a constant process. And as we get more details from USOPC on their guidelines, we may still need to make another revision towards the end of the year in order to be fully compliant. But I think this attempt will, bring a lot of compliances, make us be most of the, meet most of the compliance requirements from USOPC and also in terms of, nonprofit organization. And the next steps of the process. Some of the steps we already met. As I mentioned, January 13th, board approved the Constitution. And we are going to present these amendments to the membership starting tomorrow. So the membership will receive the ballots similar to the ballots they received during any election of directors. So election body will be sending the ballots to the registered members. We have provided the preliminary list of members who are qualified based on the eligibility criteria of the Constitution. There may be some additions as we, learn from the, as we find the missing members, we will add it to the list, and they will also receive the ballots as the election continues. So it starts tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific, and it ends on Monday, February 5th, 12:59 p.m. Pacific. So it's an 8-day window, and we have shared all the proposed amendments and the presentation in detail to the members a couple of days ago, last week, and also this afternoon. And we have also scheduled another town hall on Thursday. If any of you missed the presentation today, or if you attended but you have more questions, so please write to us at membership@usacricket.org, and we will address all of the questions and concerns, clarify them on Thursday, and also maybe we'll publish the questions and the related answers to the members as the voting continues. Yeah, that concludes our presentation. As of today, we received one question. So we'll take the opportunity to cover that question today. So that way it is addressed. So we received a question from Tim Lowell. We'll read it. Remember. So why was the number of clubs increased from 4 to 8, and how is it going to impact MLC sanctioning? So the first part of the question, basically the reason for increasing from 4 to 8, actually be increasing. Current constitution requires a minimum number of clubs to be eligible as a voting member, voting league member. It is only 3 clubs. So this constitution is, adopted in 2017, and during the initial review in 2021 itself, the CRWG recommended that the number of clubs requirement be increased to 8. Considering the growth of cricket in the country, and also to minimize any manipulation or any mismanagement of the election process. So we have seen tremendous increase in terms of participation post-COVID, and we really hope increasing the number of clubs to 8 will actually be in line with the growth of the cricket in the country. And that doesn't mean that any league who has less than 8 clubs cannot register. They can still register. They can receive all the benefits, except that they will not be a voting member until they have the 8 registered clubs. And as far as the MLC sanctioning, it does not affect MLC sanctioning. Actually, we are not clear about that part of the question, but probably you can clarify again. But it doesn't affect any sanctioning that USA Cricket will do. Jamie, have you received any questions in the chat? Or I think we'll cover those questions. If we receive any further questions, as mentioned, we will cover them on Thursday town hall, and also we'll publish if we're not able to cover during these 2 town halls. We'll publish those questions and address the answers to the membership. And once again, I take a moment to thank all the CRWG members for the amount of work they have put in to come up with these recommendations, and really thank on behalf of the board and the membership, we thank them. And I will request the members to review the proposed amendments, and request the support to take this forward by participating in the elections and casting your vote in the next 1 week. Thank you very much. We'll be back on Thursday in the second town hall. Bye now.